Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von crowdRESILIENCE TV. The Revolution will be televised. Heute mit einem neuen Format, dem Talk Spezial. Ich freue mich riesig, dass zwei meiner Freunde der Einladung zu diesem Talk gefolgt sind und miteinander ein großartiges Gespräch geführt haben. Es handelt sich um den US-amerikanischen Pathologen Dr. Ryan Cole und um den Schweizer Friedensforscher und Historiker Dr. Daniele Ganser. Das Gespräch ist auf Englisch verlaufen, wird aber auch mit deutschen Untertiteln versehen werden. Was mich bei beiden Männern, als ich sie das erste Mal kennengelernt habe, besonders fasziniert hat, war ihre extrem freundliche Art, ihre friedliebende Art und beide vereint, dass sie es schaffen, wenn sie zu großen Menschenmengen sprechen, ganz sicher jeden im Publikum auf die eine oder andere Art positiv berühren zu können. Und beiden ist auch in ihrem Vortragsstil gemein, dass sie es schaffen, oftmals über humoristische Art und Weise Menschen ins kritische Denken zu herausfordernden und schwierigen Themen dieser Zeit zu führen. Und das Wichtigste, beide Männer leben in einer Art und Weise, wie es definitiv auch nachahmenswert ist. Und was beide Menschen auch vereint ist, sie haben für jeden Tipps, wie sie es schaffen, besser in die Eigenverantwortung zu kommen und besser die Herausforderungen der heutigen Zeit zu bewältigen.
Daniele, Ryan Cole, pleasure to meet you.
It's really good to meet you, Ryan.
Great to be here in Europe again, and looking forward to your talk tonight. So, I'm here giving lectures in the medical realm, and you're a historian, so why are a doctor and a historian sitting down talking to each other? And obviously we've had a couple of interesting years behind us now, thankfully.
Yeah.
But they've set the stage for a lot of things potentially, or maybe not, ahead. So just as a physician, I have a subspecialty of pathology, and you have a very big expertise in many realms of history and have written a lot about it. But what do you think of where we are now?
I think it's an evolution that we're going through. I mean, we change from something old that we leave behind, and we go into something new that we don't know yet. I think that's really what's happening. And I saw videos from you, and then when I heard that you're in Europe and that there's a chance to meet, I thought that'd be great to have a Swiss historian and a US medical doctor meeting in Austria. I mean, it's not your country, it's not my country, and
neutral ground.
Neutral ground, and looking back on what happened. I mean, obviously, I'm very interested. What do you think about the whole Corona thing? Because I get so many people asking me, can we trust the government? Can we trust the media? I've got the vaccination. Is it going to harm me? I didn't do the vaccination. Did I do the wrong thing? I have all these questions. And
sure,
as a historian, I can't answer these questions.
Right. So you can ask me those, and then I can ask you about the direction of the world in terms of stability or not, in terms of history and where we're going in certain parts of conflict right now as well. So, but I think, it was fun before we sat down here. We were chatting a little bit about our children.
Yeah.
I think just a basic point of view, what matters most is you and I have lived so much life and seen so much and experienced so much. But I think as a father, I think both of us, the reason we're both here doing what we're doing right now is because we have a vested interest in that next generation.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, it's only a side story, but when you showed me the picture of your girls, how many children?
6 daughters.
6 daughters. It's amazing, and I have 2 children. It's a boy and a girl, and obviously that makes us interested in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
And not in an abstract way.
No.
But in a very real way. It's like, what world do we hand over to our children? And I obviously have done a lot of thinking about how does capitalism work. I mean, obviously capitalism has its very good sides in the sense that, somebody has a great idea and he thinks, I could build this or that product and I'm going to sell it to people. And if people like it, he's going to get really rich. And so there's good sides to capitalism. I'm not in a position to say capitalism is something we should throw away. But on the other hand, as a historian, I when I think of my kids, I see, okay, first of all, they're growing up in a capitalist world. That's in the US, in Switzerland, here in Austria. And then I see that a capitalist system has dysfunctional areas, and I really think this corona crisis on the one hand, and now the Ukrainian crisis on the other hand, show this dysfunctional system. Because if you sell weapons to Ukraine as Lockheed Martin or as Raytheon, as a big arms industry, you sell these weapons and they're being destroyed every day, so you can sell them again. And it's obviously in your very vested interest that wars are ongoing. And so I see the arms industry, I see the war in Ukraine, and I think of my kids and I go, what have we built? What have we built as parents, and why didn't we do better? I sometimes have this feeling, I go like, is that the best we could do? And that's how we hand it over to the kids, like, this is the world, and we have the arms industry, and they're, sometimes interested in creating wars because, people die there, but they make a huge profit. And then I say, the solution for me would really be if the shareholders, who own the companies, if they had to do the fighting in the first row.
Yes.
That'd be my solution. And I'm not sure whether, if we take this from Lockheed Martin to Pfizer, if it would be the same thing. If you say, if you have a new vaccination, would it be smart to have the people who have invested in the company to do the trials, to see whether it really works? I mean, that's
a great parallel.
It's a question from the historian to the medical doctor. Is it far-fetched?
Not at all. And I think this is where the moral and the ethic of what's happened is what has been extremely lacking. Historically, we've gone through this before, and we made promises to humankind that we wouldn't experiment again upon them. And yet we had governments around the world pushing people to the risk of job loss, to the risk of travel loss, to the risk of not going to their own sports practice as a child that was at no risk for a virus, that everybody had to comply with something that was an experiment, a gene-based product, and not having that long-term safety known at that point, and just being compelled into a pattern. But I like your idea. Well, what if all of the executives at Pfizer had to be in the first round of the shots? That would have been an ethical thing to do, because then they could say, we believe in our product. We all got it first.
Yeah, we take it as a family.
Yeah.
And then we see for like a year. I mean, how long does it take until you really know? Well,
and that's the... As a pathologist, I've done virology, immunology, did PhD work in that field. I knew from day one it wouldn't work because I knew this family of virus.
So day one is March 2020, or
when they said warp speed, we're going to have a vaccine, I said, you can't.
And they came in December 2020 with the first vaccination, just to get the historical framework.
Right. So the beginning of 2020, when they said vaccine, I said, you can't do that with this family of viruses. It will always mutate ahead of you. And here we are. There's the bivalent shots, and they're still part of the Wuhan strain. All three of those strains are extinct now, and which was predictable at the very beginning. And yet we still have entities and governments saying, but you still have to get a shot. And I say, why would I get a shot for something that's extinct? It doesn't work, for one, which we've learned. And recent studies out of the Cleveland Clinic show the more shots you get, the more you get COVID. But we also know that the strains that the shot covers are always going to be extinct by the time the next one rolls out.
So we're actually trying to run after a virus which changes all the time.
Correct.
And we always do something against the old stuff.
It's like throwing those weapons into Ukraine that they're going to get to sell again.
But going back to the kids, it means we perform pretty poorly.
Yeah, and this is where it's important that you're speaking up in your realm, I'm speaking up in my realm, because if not us, who?
Yeah.
And this is, for our children, because one of my daughters, Dad, could you just tone it down a little?
Yeah.
Like, no, I can't. Why would I? I know the truth. I know the science.
Can I tell you a story?
Please.
My daughter, Julia, she said, one of her teacher at school said, can your father come over to talk about the war in Ukraine? And then I said, I can do that, but I have to ask my daughter first, because she goes to school, and all her friends are there and everything. And I said, well, my analysis is that the Obama administration carried out a coup in Ukraine in 2014, which, largely forgotten. Victoria Nuland was there, very involved. Jeffrey Pide was the US ambassador in Kiev, and most people don't remember it. But That was 2014, and after that, the Crim split away from the country because they didn't want to, follow the new government which was installed, and then we had 8 years of civil war with about 10,000 people killed, and after that we had the invasion of Putin, which is illegal. But then I always say, the coup d'etat of Obama, and Joe Biden was vice president, was illegal. And the invasion of Putin is illegal, so that's a complicated story. And the war is not just 1 year old; it's 9 years old. Mm-hmm. So I gave this story at home at the table, and my kids sort of go, "Yeah, that's all very interesting." And I know you research this, but they have other topics they're interested. So I tell to my daughter, I've been invited by the school to give a talk, and she's like, "No, you're not coming to my school." And it's like when you say, my daughter says, "Can you?" Be a little less outspoken. And then I said, well, I said to that teacher, this specific teacher who invited me, I'll ask my daughter first, because she had, and then my daughter said, Dad, I think your research is really interesting. And I think peace is very important. And I know you try to give a balanced perspective, but you have to know, once you're gone, you're only there for a day. I'm still there at that school every day. And I said, that's why I asked you, can I come or not? And she was really thinking for 30 seconds, and I was going I'm not sure whether I can go to that school or not. And then she said, yes, you can come. Yeah, it's okay, you can come. So did your kids say that they're happy that you speak out? Or are they also
this was
proud?
one of my daughters in her 20s, but it's fun. After that conversation, she saw some more of the talks that I gave online and around the world, and she's like, okay. Because she was similar to your daughter. She was worried about the peer pressure.
Yeah, understandably.
Absolutely.
Peers are more important than dads at that age.
Seemingly so. But then my 15-year-old comes home, Dad, my science teacher loves you. Hey, Dad, this teacher loves you. And so when they get to hear from some of their peers and that Dad is actually cool.
Yeah,
they're like,
that he's got a lot of YouTube links.
I'm good. Yeah.
He's got I've seen him on TikTok.
Yeah. Wait, that's your dad? Oh, okay. But then it gives you that opportunity to have those deeper conversations with the kids, because at first they're worried about, how's it going to affect their world in terms of just their day-to-day interactions. But then when they realize that you're bringing something philosophically more important to the understanding of their friends as well. And then their friends go, oh, wait, your dad's cool.
Yep. He brings in a new narrative that you can't find on CNN or Fox News.
And that's a huge lesson we've learned over these last several years. And you've been in this game longer than I in terms of, the historical stuff as well, is this cancel culture that we've, the opportunity to freely speak. I like to say, never bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. Just let all the ideas flow. Yeah. Because some are going to be right, some are going to be wrong. Yeah. But if you don't get the ideas out there, then you can't have a true discussion.
True.
And that's what I think has been sad in the realms of the Ukrainian conflict, and in the realms of Pfizer and Moderna and the governments forcing things. Not being allowed to converse. And as we watch the Twitter files happen now and the hearings in front of the US Congress, we know how much intelligence agencies were colluding with the government and big tech to silence our voices.
Yes, it's cancel culture, and it's proven. It's like this thing, it might be, or it's a conspiracy, nobody would silence opposing voices, but we have the facts now that people who had a different perspective were not shown on primetime.
Correct.
We were just silenced.
Well, even in the files last week, not only were they canceling voices, they were canceling things that were true. Yeah. And they admitted to that in the vaccine injury groups. Even though the vaccine injuries were proven and true, Twitter was wanting to cancel those individuals as well. So it's not just canceling anything that may be an out there peripheral fringe idea. I'm like, let all ideas flow. And I think that, in terms of having a generation that's going to be able to critically think, you can only critically think if you have a breadth of constructs to address or to consider. But if you're narrowed into algorithmic thinking and you can't step outside this way or that way to think about something in a different angle or a different way, then that next generation becomes automatons or robots.
Yep.
And that's what I worry about.
And that's what we don't want for our kids, right?
Absolutely not.
That's why we sit together and go, kids,
no.
listen. What would you if we have somebody who's like 20 years old who's listening into the conversation, what would you give them as the best advice when they ask you, they say, okay, Ryan is a cool guy, how do I get my information? Because there's the New York Times, there's the Washington Post, there's CNN, there's Fox News, there's lots of YouTubers. How do I know as a 20-year-old whom to trust? I mean, this is a difficult thing.
I get this question from time to time, and what I do personally is I will listen to a CNN or a National Public Radio in the US, and then I'll listen to a very conservative one, and you can tell that the angles they're coming from, they sound just too far this way or too far that way, that you realize, wait a minute, that almost sounds like propaganda, that almost sounds like propaganda. That means the answer has to be floating somewhere in between.
Yep.
And or the answer isn't even in the conversation, because sometimes you just have to think, they're in the box, the answer's outside the box altogether. So for these younger generations, I say, don't align yourself with just one source. Because if you listen to that confirmation bias source, then you get locked into a thought pattern.
Yeah,
and you have to pull yourself out and be a third-party observer of everything. So I like to say, okay, they're saying this, I don't have, obviously we all bring our biases to life, but I'll just say, okay, where's the real answer? Because if I were an alien from another planet coming in and had never heard any of the ideas before, I would have to consider all the ideas before I drew a conclusion.
Yeah.
And so that's what there's a great independent media sources online now. Look at who's funding the media. I think if you want to understand, especially for that 20-year-old, because I have several 20-year-olds.
Yes.
It's like, look, who's paying for that news source?
Yeah.
And if it's an independent, unbiased news source, then you can probably trust the information more. And then the other important thing is, are they presenting facts or are they presenting opinions?
Yeah.
Because the newspapers seem now to be too editorial. They're
Lots of opinions.
Opinion making instead of fact delivering.
Yeah. And in this media world, are there some brands that you would recommend? Then I hear the Gray Zone, the Intercept, Democracy Now. It's a lot of different brands, which are not CNN and not Fox News and not the New York Times. Because people go like, there's only these three, Fox, CNN, and New York Times and Washington Post. And I say, outside, there's lots of people.
There are a lot. There's
Russell Brand.
I love Russell Brand. He's great, especially if you're that younger generation.
And he's a YouTube star.
Yeah, absolutely. 6 million followers. He's got a sense of humor.
Yeah. And he's really out of the box.
Absolutely. and
he breaks all the rules.
I think he's a fellow Gemini like me. It's just that out of the box thinking, and he does. And so I think, and I've watched some of your talks, and some people have seen some of my talks, and I watched him. I think part of what this younger generation wants is to be entertained as well.
Yep.
So throwing that humor in and finding a source that's going to be serious enough to bring the facts, but at the same time putting that questioning, sarcastic, joking spin.
Enjoying life.
Absolutely.
We're not depressed.
No.
It's a great planet.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great planet. Human beings are great human beings, and it's important to. I mean, that's also something as dads that we're totally convinced of and want to sort of hand on to the next generation. It's great to be here. It's a privilege to be on Mother Earth and interact and. But it's also challenging when you have people who've taken the vaccination and who are now suffering. What should we do with people who are suffering?
Acknowledge them. The first thing is acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And that's been the tragedy with the suppression of information and the canceling of voices is some governments around the world have finally acknowledged, oh yes, vaccine injury is real. And yes, these shots were experimental and we didn't know what was going to happen. Some of us had pretty good ideas, but at the same time, to deny somebody their lived experience is really not an ethical thing to do. So number one, the vaccine injured, yes, they do exist. Are most people okay? Yeah, we talked about this briefly before, that the good thing is a lot of people right now aren't injured. Great. but we have
the majority.
The majority,
overwhelmed, because I have good friends who've taken the vaccination. I didn't take the vaccination, but I have good friends, and that's why I like to talk to doctors, and not like mainstream doctors, but critical doctors like you, who think outside of the box, and who've you know, even during the crisis, have come up with questions, have come up and taken a stand. It's because I think it's easier now to say, yeah, I always thought there were problems, but it's actually, while the train is driving, I want to see somebody commenting. You know, that's you know, again, respect for your work.
Thank you.
Because you were there and you gave people at least a second opinion. You know?
Right. And you know, that goes back to allowing a second opinion. Everybody should be allowed that second opinion, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in history, whether it's in physics, whatever it is, just understanding that, is there another point of view?
Yeah, and there always is.
There always is, and whether it's Russell Brand, or there's one I like called Redacted, where they just,
seen that.
They're fun. There's so many, I'm not going to endorse one or another, but
there are different voices out there.
Absolutely. And I like to, like, going back to the science question, I say, if you want to follow the science, follow the silenced. And that's the group of us who've tried to speak out, saying, here's the risks, here's what we're concerned about, but we've been silenced. And if it's being suppressed or silenced, don't get me wrong, there are things out there that are pretty crazy extreme, and that you and I talked about, that I don't believe and you probably don't believe. But I still grant those people their voice, as long as they'll have a conversation and engage. And sometimes people get too caught up in, it's got to be this way and this way only. But you don't progress or evolve if you're stuck in that thought pattern either. So for these young people, for my kids, for your kids, I just say, make sure you're getting your information from as many sources as possible. And then engage your brain to think, you may find the real answer in whatever realm of life. But going back to, you know, like science, science is never settled. We're always learning. And we've lived this 3 years doing things that some of us as physician scientists have tried to speak out against, and we could have helped a lot of people earlier and could have stopped some of those harms that have happened. But I think being humble enough as a society and a world to say, sometimes we do things wrong and we're not going to repeat those mistakes.
Yeah. And for me, that's the same. You know, it's interesting how you as a physician and me as a historian, that we come to similar conclusions, even though we never met. I mean,
just today,
it's great. We never met. But I also have this perspective that when you look at, you know, the Vietnam War or the Cuban Missile Crisis, you have to get different perspectives. And I had exactly the same experience. I think I was 25 years old, so 25 years ago now. And I studied the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962.
Was this before your ticket in Idaho or after?
That was shortly before.
We were joking earlier that you went there to get your first ticket.
That's it.
I live in Boise, and then I came over here a couple months ago and got my ticket on the Autobahn. So anyway, it was
a great time in Idaho and Boise, and people were so nice to me. You know, they gave me the car because I wanted to meet a friend in Seattle, and we traveled Washington State. But back to that experience, I was then reading about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I grabbed the first book, and it said, you know, the Soviets are really crazy. They put nuclear missiles into Cuba. Now, it was a 200 pages book, so I thought, if it's a 200 pages book, it has to be the full story. And I thought, yeah, the Soviets are really crazy. And then I grabbed another book and also said, yeah, Kennedy was, you know, right to stop Khrushchev, who was then, you know, ruling the Soviet Union, because Kennedy clearly saw, come on, they put nuclear missiles into Cuba, and Fidel Castro wanted these missiles, and basically the book made the same point, the Soviets are crazy. And then I read a third book, and it was completely different, and it said, you know, in Cuba there was an invasion by the CIA in 1961, and that, you know, invasion tried to overthrow Fidel Castro, and so the Americans are guilty of trying to destabilize Cuba. And I go, well, that, you know, sheds a new light on the whole story. And then I went into the records of the Kennedy administration, because when Kennedy was president, he had everything wiretapped in the White House. He invited the CIA director, the defense minister, the foreign minister. Everybody was there in the White House. Robert, obviously, his brother, and they debated, how can we react, you know, to this nuclear threat in Cuba. And then there was, it was really every person, what they say and everything. And then Kennedy says, but Khrushchev is really crazy, He puts these missiles into Cuba. That's as if we had put missiles into Turkey. And then his national security advisor says, no, that's really interesting, right? That's the original text. Says, well, Mr. President, we did. And then that's the first time, working on that point that you were making, that we need to change our perspective once and then change it twice and then get a third or fourth opinion. That showed me that the President of the United States in 1962 was John F. Kennedy, and he didn't know that there were nuclear missiles in Turkey. And it was also important for him to realize the other side's perspective,
right.
Because at the end they solved the nuclear missile crisis. Khrushchev was agreeing to withdraw his missiles from Cuba, and Kennedy said, okay, we'll withdraw our missiles from Turkey, and that was the swap they
Sure.
did. But it's fascinating that even, an example like this historical episode brings us to the conclusion, always listen to 4 or 5 different voices.
Yes.
Listen to the silenced voices. I thought that was a very important point that I sort of give to my kids when they ask me. And it holds true in history and in medicine as well, and probably in many different fields.
Yeah, and in medicine, I like to say, what makes a good physician? Because people say, how do I find a good doctor? I say, well, they need 2 things. They need to care, and they need to be curious.
Yeah.
And so much of medicine lost its curiosity during these last 3 years.
Yeah.
And I've said to my daughter, I drove my kids nuts for years, because we'd sit down to the dinner table and they knew the question was coming. The question would always be, what new thing did you learn today? And I didn't care if it was in music or beekeeping or farming or school or sports. As long as you learned something new today, your day is complete. And so going back to the curiosity, I had a mentor once say, the moment you lose your curiosity is the moment you die. So some people die at 25, but aren't buried till they're 85.
Yes.
So maintaining that curiosity in life helps you become a critical thinker. And I think that curiosity will take you into those realms of, okay, I'm going to look at something from 4, 5, 6 different perspectives because I have a curious mind. Granted, there are topics that will bore our children to death. I get that. They don't have to know all the facts that I know or you know in your realms. But at the same time, just to have enough interest in a breadth of life to be able to say, I want to know a little bit about this, 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 or this. And as a generation that's experienced more life at this point, I like your point that you brought up. Where do you point them? Yeah. Never to one place.
And the curiosity for me is also the driving force. I mean, some might say, well, these 2 guys, they've done their research and now they just recycle their thoughts. It's not like that.
No.
We learn every year, right?
Right.
I mean, I would never have thought that in 2023, we are in this situation that we are right now. And I'm reading and I'm talking to people, and that's also the nice thing. I mean, we're like 7,000 kilometers apart where we live, like Switzerland and US and Boise, Idaho, and you draw it on the map. But still, we both love the world and we love our kids, and we want them to remain curious, because I sometimes get this impression that not every school, but some schools really tell the kids to not ask certain questions.
Right.
And I think that is basically a crime. I mean, a question is always, valuable. In fact, questions are the most important thing that we have, because
Absolutely.
once they open doors. So my point is really to the younger generation, but also to people who are 70, ask questions.
Yes.
Ask yourself, what happened on 9/11? Ask yourself, was this vaccine helpful or was it harmful? Ask yourself, when did the war in Ukraine start? And ask yourself, I mean, how does the media work? Who owns that media that I read every day?
That is so important.
What is capitalism?
Right. Yeah, and where should the restraints be on it?
Yeah.
At what point do you say, okay, it's good to this point? And yeah, I can see myself at 97 years old or 107 years old still delving into new hobbies and topics and curiosities, because really I joke that knowledge is my drug of choice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the willingness to always be wrong and being able to say, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, again, for another, I know it drives you, I don't know, so you go look. I don't know, so I go look.
Yeah.
But doing that as a parent and or as a teacher, my last mentor in medical training, he said, you leave a legacy in life one of two ways, either as a teacher or as a parent. Mm-hmm. And you can be both. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we're doing is trying to leave a legacy of curiosity and critical thinking for another generation.
That's it. I think critical thinking is really what we're passionate about.
Absolutely.
And we're trying to sort of hand it over to the next generation. We try to be a role model in critical thinking. I sometimes attract a lot of criticism, and then some people might think, well, okay, critical thinking is maybe not that much fun because people are, going to attack you in the media and they're going to write evil articles about you, and then I always say, that's the price to pay. I mean, you have a thought nobody wants to hear, share it, and you will survive. It can be that people.
We're still both here, right?
Yeah. I wanted to get to this point. I mean, if it's not too private, I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with shitstorms? I mean, that's something we have to go through. It's not that everybody's happy that we're asking questions.
No.
It's not that everybody's happy that we come forward with our conclusions. Right. Some people say I'd rather that they shut up. I mean, that's matter of fact. But how do you personally deal with shitstorms?
Number one, just having good friends, having a place to fall back on to recognize that in spite of all those attacks, life is still a beautiful experience.
Yes.
And the world is still a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And there are mean people in the world, but as I've traveled the world and lectured around the world, realizing that the heart of mankind and humankind is really good.
Yeah.
At the base of most of it, it's still good. There will always be the critics. I invite them all the time. If you disagree with me, bring better information, bring better data. Let's sit down face to face, have lunch, have coffee, and disagree. But bring me better information, better data, and I'll change my mind.
But they usually don't come.
No, never. Not once in the last 3 years have they taken me up on that offer.
Yeah.
So what that tells me is stand in the truth. What was it, Gandhi that said, even in a world that is silent, one voice can be powerful. I'm paraphrasing. And another is, even if you're a voice of one, stand in your truth.
That's it. I'm fully in with you on that one, because I have the same feeling. Like it's coming from the inside, that I say, these are my research findings.
Yes.
And then I say, I was at a Swiss university called the Center for Security Studies, and I did research on 9/11. And then I said the World Trade Center 7 was not hit by a plane; they came down.
I remember that.
And then I said,
I watched that controlled demolition years ago. I'm like, that's a controlled demolition.
Yeah,
it was obvious.
And I said, this is controlled demolition. I wrote it in a Swiss newspaper in 2006, and I had a huge shitstorm after that. And then I went to my wife, because that's where I listen, how do you deal with shitstorms? And you say, it's friends, family, nature. And the same with me. I asked my wife, and I said, it can threaten my academic career and whatever. And then she said, well, you just have to stick with the truth. I mean, if that's what she was asking like basic questions, like, are you sure the third building, World Trade Center, fell? And I said, yes, I'm sure. I just published a 1-page article on it in the Swiss newspaper, Tagesanzeiger is called, and they said, well, how did it go down? Was it, was there an earthquake, or did they shoot missiles into it, or was it hit by a plane? And I said, no, none of the three. And then she said, so what was it? And I said, controlled demolition. And then she said, did you write that? And I said, yeah, I sort of wrote that. And she said, yeah, but if it's the truth, it's fine. But then she said, what's your problem? And I said, I could be fired, So there's I think many people out there know a lot, but they're scared to lose their job. They're scared to lose their income, which I understand. I'm not saying this is a non-issue. I think it's an issue. But
this is a great point, though, because I technically had to sell my laboratory because the insurance companies canceled me for my unprofessional behavior.
When was that?
End of 22.
Okay.
So technically now I just do pathology consultation work, and I do a lot of public speaking. But technically I'm not doing my day-to-day job anymore because the insurance companies, not the medical boards, I'm still being attacked by some of those as well. So sometimes standing for the truth no matter what, you get to the point that's the no matter what. Mm-hmm. And did I technically lose my job? I did.
Okay.
Would I?
My respect has just risen.
Thank you. Thank you. But I didn't do that but to seek any pity or anything. Just for me, the truth is more important than
the lab.
Yeah.
You don't regret the step, right? You don't say, had I known in advance that this is the price tag?
I would have paid the price. I would go back and pay the same price over and over and over
because
again.
Truth is like your overall guiding.
Right. Yeah, you can take my farm and my house. I'll live in a tent, but I'll still be a happy person. That you can't take from me.
Yes.
And I think, do I like my farm and my house? Sure. And my wood shop? Sure. All my hobbies. But the material comforts of life can come, they can go. I had a house fire 4 years ago, and you realize that everything can be lost like that.
Yes.
But if you have something here, and that's a solid integrity and truth and meaning, then the material things don't matter. Don't get me wrong, material things, everybody wants some degree of material comfort, and we want to bring the world out of poverty and have the world, live to a level of comfort that everybody should have that decency and respect to live. But at the end of the day, your things go away when you go away.
Yeah.
But to leave that legacy of truth-seeking to another generation and standing for principle, I admire what you're doing, because I think that's what we're both trying to do, is show the truth, whether it's uncomfortable or not. Yeah. Because it's uncomfortable at times, I agree.
Yeah, we both know it.
Yeah,
we both know it.
So how do you deal with it? Same way.
I just see in your, a soul brother. I have to say it like that, because you go like, there's, the lab where I work, which I liked, and then, capitalism comes in and says we have to reduce our risks. That's all they do. They just reduce it. They're not interested in truth.
Right.
They just say this is threatening the profit, so we have to reduce the risk. I see the calculation they do.
Sure.
But I have the same love for truth like you do, because I think it's the real wealth. It is the real wealth.
Absolutely.
You can collect this, you can collect that, you can collect the yacht and the car and everything, and you will feel empty, I guess. Empty, because in Switzerland, we have many rich people. It's not, in the US, it's the same, and it's not the question whether we have enough food or not. We all have enough food, or whether we have enough movies on Netflix. There are more movies they can watch until you die. But the energy that is, giving us the power to live from one day to the next day, I think really comes from this source that you call curiosity and the love for truth. This is something, it doesn't go away. Yeah. And you don't have to buy it. And I think if we can just, with our example, remind the young generation, and also, the people in our age or elder, that they can tap into that energy. Right. Then I think that'd be really, really nice.
And I this brings up one more thought, and that's, the world is an abundant place.
Yeah.
And we have so many outside structures that live in fear and restriction, and if we don't do this, there's not enough of this, there's not enough of this. And everybody forces this restrictive mindset onto these younger generations. Oh, you can't use the earth like we use the earth. I'm like, well, we can be good stewards of the earth. The earth is abundant. I look at my little farm.
Yeah.
We feed off my little farm 50 families.
That's in Idaho, right?
Yeah, in Idaho.
How many square meters?
21 acres.
Acres, yeah.
And so all summer long we feed 50 families. And it's a couple of farmers, and I do what I can when I'm there. But at the end of the day, how much do we give of the abundance that we have? And I did, years ago I did volunteer work with Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. And then...
where was that? In what country?
I was in Mexico with that. And then I also did some mission work, volunteer work, back in Argentina in the 1980s. But when you go to these other places, it was fascinating to me because the poorest of people would say, I want you to come to my house, and they would give you of their abundance.
Yep.
And you would see the world for the goodness that it is. And I think, you know, what you offer the world, what I offer the world is, you're a teacher, I'm a teacher. We teach from the abundance that we've gained, but I think trying to find a way to get that next generation, instead of that consuming, you know, where's my movie, where's my next dopamine hit in my brain?
Yes.
You know, how can I be you know, we're entertaining ourselves today, but how can we find a way to say, the world life gave to me abundantly today, whether it's a material item or not, or whether it's an intellectual item, how can I give that abundance to somebody else?
I think that's a beautiful thought. It's really something that inspires me a lot as well. It's this thought of, you know, the glass is not half empty, it's half full. It's really half full, and there's like loads to it. And maybe, you know, we've already covered a lot of topics, but one last thing I'm really interested in. I wanted to talk, because you're a doctor. I was so interested reading into near-death experiences. It's a new topic, but it's something that's been around for a long time. And what these people say is that they, I've never had a near-death experience, but obviously I can read, and you know, there are a lot of books, and when there are books on a topic and my curiosity brings me, so I just go and dig. And I read Raymond Moody, I read Pim from Normal, I read the other guy, an American guy, he was also a doctor, Proof of Heaven, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I've read that one, neurologist.
Yeah, neurology says, that's just nonsense, and it's the brain firing around, and then I go, for me, it is a proof, and it also gives me, you know, a lot of strength and a lot of clarity when I say, you know, consciousness cannot be destroyed. I mean, the body will just, you know, at one point it will just decay, but there's no price for you know, being especially long in the body. I mean, some people are for a short time in the body, some people are for a very long time in the body, and you still can't say which life has been more valuable. But the point I want to make is, these near-death experiences, always these people who come back and then still are in their body and say, this and that, they say, I was watching my body from the outside. So they basically say, you don't need your eyes to see. We're so used to it that we say, if we don't have the eyes, we can't see anymore. But they say it's basically consciousness which is in the body and then uses the eyes. But when the body in a severe car accident, you know, the body is destroyed, consciousness sees from the outside. And I thought it's just fascinating. And I know this would be another it would be another 2 hours we could
talk on this.
But are you interested in these questions?
Absolutely.
As well?
I've read some of these books. I've had some personal life experiences close to some of these near-death experiences, some friends, close family members. And the experiences, the story, like you were mentioning, is very similar in terms of the pattern they experience. And having that consciousness point of view, just from certain experiences I've had in terms of the experimentation with the mind and going to other places and having vision without vision, and that's a great topic.
And if there is data there to really build your, I mean, it's not data that we discuss at university. I mean, in history department, we never talked about near-death experience. Did you in your education?
Oh gosh, no.
No, it was forbidden, right?
Yeah, I mean,
but we were curious, so we looked across the wall and said, "That's an interesting topic, which we cannot talk about in class."
The key to learning is learning how to learn.
Yeah.
And those classroom experiences. Yeah. And I think that's where you have fun with life and I have fun with life. It's, okay, I learned how to learn, and then I found mentors. Finding a good mentor along the way makes a big difference.
Yeah, sure.
But learning how to learn, because then when you find that topic, you realize, okay, there's a good book on that. There's another good book. There's another good book. And then having conversations and
I will read it regardless what people say.
Exactly.
That's what we always did, right?
Yeah.
I learned most of the stuff outside university.
Sure.
I got my degrees at universities, but stuff I couldn't, sort of discuss at university, I just read it at home.
Absolutely. But you had that foundation, and education is important in the sense that you have that foundational principles, etc. Those are the building blocks, but the real education comes after that piece of paper is on the wall.
It was such a privilege talking to you.
You as
Ryan.
well. I'm looking forward to your talk tonight.
Yeah, we'll meet again, and
it was
basically our main message to encourage people to remain curious. Or what would be your final statement?
My final statement is: life is beautiful.
Yeah.
We're still blessed to live it.
Yeah.
The world is abundant. You've been gifted with a mind. Be a curious, creative, caring person.
Wonderful. Such a privilege.
Thank you.